There are fairies on the farm. My award-winning fairy fantasy novel, The Ghost of Nothing, is available now in ebook, audiobook, and paperback. Link in the description. When I was about 13 or 14, I had a treehouse way up high in an old oak behind my house. I loved it up there. It was my little hideaway where I'd spend hours doing arts and crafts. That day, I was practicing my sewing, getting all my materials set up on the wooden floorboards, when I saw something strange. At first, I thought it was just a bug wing. We had plenty of big insects where I lived. But when I looked closer, I knew it wasn't from any bug I'd ever seen before. It was long, almost as long as my thumb, and wider than any dragonfly wing. It had an iridescent shimmer like oil on water, catching the light in a way that didn't seem natural. And the edges, something about them looked too clean, too precise, like the wing had been freshly severed. I remember staring at it, completely mesmerized. Then, when I reached out and barely brushed it with my fingertip, it moved. It twitched. Just a tiny jerk, like whatever had lost it was still somehow connected to it. That's when I got the strangest feeling, a deep, unsettling sense that I shouldn't take my eyes off this thing. I had this feeling that if I left, whatever had lost the wing would come back for it. But I had to show someone. I knew no one would believe me unless I had proof, so I decided to go get tweezers and a container. I was careful. I put a small bowl over the wing to keep it safe, then weighed it down with a heavy crafting book. Just to be sure, I placed other objects in a rough circle around it, figuring that if something moved the wing, I'd be able to tell. Then I ran down the ladder and into the house, grabbed what I needed, and rushed back up. I was gone maybe 2 minutes. When I lifted the bowl, the wing was gone. Nothing else had moved. The book was exactly where I'd left it. The little barricade I'd made around the bowl was untouched, but the wing had simply vanished. I searched everywhere, every crack between the floorboards, every corner of the treehouse. There was no wind, no way it could have blown away. It was just gone. Of course, when I told my family, they laughed it off, said I must have imagined it. I was still quite a childish teen at the time, not really acting like a proper teenager yet, so they probably thought I'd been playing make-believe. But I know what I saw, and I know that a wing like that doesn't just disappear into thin air. Even now, in my 30s, I still think about it. I've never stopped believing, not really, because deep down I'm sure that for a brief moment, I wasn't alone in that treehouse. That wing belonged to a fairy. My first fairy or pixie encounter happened in 2019 on the 5th of January. I returned to my house, which is in suburban Redcliffe, after an awkward date. I was feeling deflated and a bit disheartened. My parents were out on their own outing, but at least I had my 2 Cavalier dogs at the time to greet me. After cuddling them, I sat at my piano, which was 104 years at the time, and started playing as I usually did, and still do when I'm upset and need to pour my emotions through music. I think I was playing the song Somewhere in Time when I saw a very tiny, sparkly, and silvery white and see-through bug-like creature flutter out from the flatboard of the piano. I thought it was just an insect at first until it vanished back into the piano. Okay, surely I was imagining this. I was feeling a bit lightheaded at the time and thought it was a trick of the eye. until I saw it peep and flutter back from the end of the piano and then in front of me. I noticed this tiny creature had clothes on, a silvery, choppy dress made out of tiny silver stars or a glitter like substance. I saw the brown color of the piano through her body. Yes, I sensed she was female. Her face, eyes, and hair were white and silvery, the same colors blended in her whole body, if that makes sense. Her hair was short like a Disney fairy periwinkle, and it was misty and blended with her head. It was hard to tell if she even had hair at first, but when she fluttered, I saw a kind of mist on her head too, as if that was her hair. Her wings were round, sparkly, transparent, with two silver and white swallow tails on the end. I sensed the curiosity of this little pixie or fairy. The first time seeing her, it was only half a second from the sighting to the moment she vanished into the piano. When she came back, she remained visible for another half a second, then vanished again. I remember I had fairy stickers on my piano at the time, and she flittered past one of them. I was in awe and shock, trying to register what had happened. My dogs were just laying on the floor at the time. It occurred to me that a few days before, Dad reported that Bonnie, my youngest dog, had been barking at my piano, fixated on it, and that a pencil had rolled off the top of the piano by itself, with no wind interference. Ever since this first encounter, I've been more interested in fairies and I've had a few more experiences with them. I've noticed a pattern that when I see them, it's always when I'm stressed or worried about something going on in my life, and it's like they come to cheer me up, or so I'd like to believe. I relayed my experience to a woman who is an expert in fairy folklore, and she told me I saw a curious pixie. I wish I'd said hello to that piano pixie, but it was my first encounter and I was confused at the time. But if I ever see this pixie or fairy again, I'll try to say hello. Thank you for listening to my story. This happened many years ago, but the memory of it is still crystal clear in my mind. Currently, I'm a 36-year-old man. However, back then, I was a skinny and mischievous 11-year-old boy. We grew up in a house that we believed to be haunted. Looking back now, I would say that it was more of a place where paranormal activity would pass through rather than being truly haunted itself. It was like a doorway to the unknown. Our old house was filled with strange occurrences, some of which were terrifying, while others left us puzzled. Out of all these strange happenings, only one involved what I can describe as a fairy. On that particular day, my cousin, who was a year younger than me, and I were playing in her bedroom. We were happily occupied with our own little world, having a blast. I distinctly remember that we were trying to attach an elastic band to a homemade boat, hoping to make the propeller spin. We were quite resourceful kids. Our house was situated right across from a field, so it was common for us to encounter field mice. They were everywhere, scurrying in and out of the house, searching for food or simply exploring. As fate would have it, we were building our boat on one of the two beds in the room. We had grown accustomed to the sounds of mice scurrying around, so it had become background noise that we hardly paid attention to. The bed behind us was an old one with springs that we often used to hide under during games of hide and seek. It was the same bed that, if you weren't careful, could catch your hair in its coils and give you a little surprise. After struggling for a while with our boat, we suddenly heard the familiar sound of the springs. It was as if something was truly stuck in there, a sound we recognized from our own experiences of being trapped under the bed. The only reason we took notice was because the struggling continued for an unusually long time. We dared each other to peek under the mattress and see what was causing the commotion. It wasn't that we were afraid of mice, but we were hesitant nevertheless. The noise grew louder and louder, indicating that whatever was making it was struggling with increasing intensity. However, it abruptly ceased, leaving us perplexed. We exchanged glances and shrugged, silently agreeing to inform the adults about the situation later. Surely whatever it was must have exhausted itself by then. Just as we turned around, a distinct sound reached our ears. It was a forceful tug on the strings, accompanied by the flapping of wings. We could actually hear the fluttering as the last bit of tension in the spring gave way, releasing its prey. Emerging from beneath the bed was a petite, slender girl with wings capable of flight. She stood no taller than a ruler, and we caught sight of her tiny head, arms, and legs. The source of the noise became apparent. Butterfly wings that were almost as large as her entire body. Clearly in a hurry to escape from under the bed, her wings flapped rapidly. I distinctly remember seeing her wings flutter twice as she flew directly between us. We were frozen in place, and as soon as she reached the opposite side of the room, she vanished into thin air, leaving no trace behind. In shock, we looked at each other and rushed to my brother-in-law, screaming about our encounter with a fairy. As we were jumping and screaming about what we had seen, I realized our boat was still inside the room. I pleaded with my brother-in-law to check out the room and make sure it was safe so we could get our boat back. He didn't seem like he believed us, but agreed to inspect the room anyway. He called to us that there was nothing there, and we cautiously entered the room again and retrieved our boat. While we were playing with our completed boat, we reached a mutual understanding. We understood what we had witnessed. Fairies were real. Now, as an adult, having had a lot of time to think about it, I believe that reality is composed of multiple layers, necessary to transform the world we perceive into something tangible that we can touch, see, taste, and feel. Within or between these layers, there exist places and spaces for beings that we can't even fathom or comprehend. Some may call it the veil, dimensions, parallel universes, or even planes of existence. It may be different, but it is essential for the very foundation of creation. I believe fairies reside and conceal themselves there, occasionally paying us a visit. Sometimes it happens by accident in inconvenient places like the underside of an old bed with springs. Regardless of whether my theory is correct, I am certain of what I witnessed. Both of us saw it. Fairies are real. I'm a 35-year-old woman from Bulgaria, and since I was little, I have had many experiences that could only have a supernatural explanation. In the words of Sherlock Holmes, once you eliminate the impossible, whatever remains, no matter how improbable, must be the truth. I've accepted that I seem to be sensitive to what is invisible for the eye and not feel scared of it, like when I was little. When it comes to fairies, I've always been fascinated by their world, reading books and watching movies, listening to stories from my grandma, etc. But it's been a long time since I've thought about them or anything magical for that matter. I was feeling rather anxious and lost a few months ago when I suddenly encountered a video of yours on YouTube. The more I listened, the better I started feeling and more cheerful, as if it was meant to remind me of that world again and somehow comfort me. I took it as a sign. A few weeks after that, I was visiting my best friend in another city. There's a huge forest-type park there, full of places where you can feel like you're truly immersed into the wilderness, far outside of civilization. There's also this particular side of the park that is famous for its wishing bridge, right next to a clearing above a small brook. The legend says that if you manage to pass the whole bridge from one side to the other with your eyes closed, your wish will come true. I've been there many times before, but on this occasion, instead of visiting the bridge, my friend and I decided to start climbing the terrace-like rock formations which lead higher up. It was getting late, and by the time we managed to climb to the top, the sun had already set. We were up there, breathing the clean air, when all of a sudden, I felt tingles all over, and I looked around. I didn't see anything out of the ordinary, but I remembered your stories, and something compelled me to say out loud, "Greetings to all forest creatures lurking here, especially if there are any fairies. Please bless us and give us a sign." My best friend, who's more of a skeptic, just rolled her eyes and laughed at me, thinking I was being silly. We spent some more time there and then started to slowly descend. On the way down, we crossed the bridge and then reached the park alley at a leisurely pace. We were lost in conversation. Then I looked up, my eyes drawn by a sudden flicker of one of the street lamps. The alleys of the park had street lamps on each side, spaced just a couple of meters apart, and one of them was definitely flickering as if it needed to be changed. There was only one lamp doing this, so we thought nothing of it. We kept walking, and suddenly on the other side of the alley, a little further down, just as we were walking past it, another lamp started flickering as well. Okay, 2 lamps in a row start flickering right when we were passing them. We thought it was strange, but still a coincidence. We kept walking, and every few meters when we reached a new lamp, it started to flicker too, switching off and on, joining the ones already doing so. None of the lamps further down the road were doing that, only those that we got close to, and it was getting too obvious not to notice. My friend joked that I seemed to be influencing the electricity. I gasped and said, "Oh my God, that must be the fairies giving us a sign. I asked for it, remember?" We kept following the alleys, making deliberate turns to side alleys, and still more lights started flickering as we neared them, as if guiding us until we eventually reached the park's exit. We turned around, and all the lights in the entire area were flickering. It was so beautiful. I managed to capture it on video, too. The very next evening, some friends of mine were walking past the same alleys, and they said there was no flickering at all. Every lamp was working as it should, which only proves that it was not a technical issue, but really something else. I felt such powerful tingles already knowing the answer deep down. I am sure it was a sign from the fairies, especially because the next day some things happened that were very out of the ordinary. Some a bit inexplicable, others more like a sudden stroke of luck. I found something I was looking for a long time. I believe there are fairies out there and that they can communicate with us in their own way. I hope I can one day see them or experience something more. Apologies if this is a bit all over the place. I've never been much of a storyteller. I seem to have fairies in my house. Last year, I moved into a 200-year-old farm cottage in Northumberland. It's exactly the sort of place I've always wanted. Thick stone walls, low beams, a proper inglenook fireplace. But not long after I settled in, strange little things started happening. Objects would move when I hadn't touched them. At first, I blamed the cat. She's always been a bit skittish, but she started having proper mad moments, chasing things I couldn't see, jumping at shadows. A couple of times, she leapt straight into the air from a dead sleep, as if something had startled her. And then there was the toy llama. It's a fluffy little thing, nothing special. I never saw the cat take any interest in it, but somehow it kept moving. I'd leave it on one spot only to find it several feet away later. One day I let the cat out the front and stepped out the back myself. When I came back in, the llama was standing upright in the middle of the rug, 10 feet from where I'd left it. Odd, but still, I tried to explain it away. Then, a few days later, I came downstairs to find that a stained glass roundel had been neatly removed from the window. It had been hung by a chain on a sucker hook, and now it was resting on the sill, 4 feet below, completely intact. The chain was pulled tight as if it was still hanging, and the hook itself was placed neatly at the other end of the sill. That was harder to dismiss. I mentioned all this to my neighbor, who nodded like it was the most normal thing in the world. She told me she often loses things only for them to turn up exactly where she'd already looked. But I've got 4 kids, she added. Could be them. I asked another older neighbor. She gave me a look like I was daft and said, "Of course, it's the fairies. What do you think I have all the bells and wind chimes and little lights for? You have to keep them happy, or they play mischief." She asked me if I'd done anything that might have upset them. I couldn't think of anything at first. Then I remembered I removed an old stone plinth from an awful 1970s fireplace feature. Inside, I'd found a few small children's shoes and bits of old toys. Not ancient, just from the 70s. But could they have been left there as some kind of offering? From then on, I started acknowledging them. I'd ask permission before I moved things, leave out little gifts now and then, and the strange happenings eased and the cat calmed down. But then there was the night of the lights. I couldn't get warm in bed. No matter how many blankets I piled on, I was freezing. Then I saw these bright green orbs hanging in the air, seeming to float around the room. Not reflections, not anything I could explain. I got up to investigate, but as soon as I moved, they were gone. I turned off the light and got back into bed. A moment later, they returned. I couldn't explain it. A few nights later, I saw them again, this time outside, floating over the back field. I don't think we have fireflies in the UK, so they couldn't have been those. Then, a few weeks ago, another incident. I had just arrived home, unlocked my front door, and walked into the kitchen, and found an Amazon parcel sitting there waiting for me. No one else has a key except my son, who's stationed at the other end of the country with the military. None of the neighbors knew anything about it. We don't even have a regular delivery person I could ask. I was baffled. A few nights later, I woke up from a dream about fire, sweating. My electric blanket was on full blast, but I hadn't turned it on, and there was no way it could have turned itself on. It was still dark, around 4 a.m., and as I unplugged the electric blanket, I heard a noise coming from the bathroom. I got up to check and found the bathroom fan heater was running. It's one of those old ones with a pull cord. There's no other way to turn it on. But there it was, blasting away in the middle of the night. I know I hadn't turned it on. I went downstairs to check the rest of the house, but everything else was normal. When I came back up, the electric blanket was plugged in again, this time on the other side of the bed. It was plugged into an entirely different socket across the room, and was now on full blast again, too. This was impossible. That was the last big event, and since then everything's been quiet. I can't say for certain what's been happening in this house. Some of it sounds like classic poltergeist activity. I thought it might be related to the people next door. A family lives there with 4 kids. When I first moved in, there was a lot of tension there. A teenage daughter who hated the move, who resented her mother's new partner. There was a lot of distress in that house. But as time went on, things settled. She grew up, adjusted. And as they settled, so did the disturbances in my house. I don't know what that means. I don't know if it was fairies or a poltergeist or something else entirely. I've taken my older neighbor's advice, though, and put up some wind chimes. I acknowledge them now every day, and maybe that's why they've quieted down. Whatever they are, I sense they're still here in this house, and they don't like to be ignored for too long. Thanks for watching, and thank you to everyone who submitted their stories for this one. There's something so strange and fascinating about these objects that could be connected to fairy activity, whether it's items that seem to have a presence attached to them, objects that disappear and reappear under mysterious circumstances, or even things that seem to have physical traces of fairies attached to them. I mean, like fairy wings. It makes you wonder, are these things intentional gifts or tricks? Glimpses into a world that we don't fully understand? Let me hear your thoughts on all of this down in the comments. If you love eerie fairy lore, be sure to check out my fairy fantasy novel, The Ghosts of Nothing. It's a spooky, supernatural tale about a girl living in a haunted town that turns out to have more than just ghosts. Fairies are at work there in the shadows, too. The book has won some awards, including being a finalist in the Independent Author Association's Best Book of the Year award, and it's been getting great reviews. So if you enjoy the kind of stories I share here, I think you'll love it. So be sure to check it out. If you'd like a chance to win a free copy of the audiobook of The Ghost of Nothing, subscribe to one of my newsletters, whether my fairy newsletter, Fairy Lights, or my writing newsletter, The Shaken Tree. Each month, I'm randomly selecting a subscriber of one of those newsletters for a free giveaway, and it's completely free to join. You'll find the sign up link on my website and in the description below. Do you have a story of your own to share? I'd love to hear it. You can submit your fairy experiences through the form on my website, scaryfairygodmother.com. And you'll also find the links to my mailing list sign up there too, along with all the ways to stay connected. All you have to do is enter your email to be on the list. A huge heartfelt thank you to all my supporters on Patreon, as well as those who've joined the channel, made a one-time donation through PayPal or Ko-fi, or become a paid newsletter subscriber. Your support helps keep this work going, and I appreciate you all so, so much. If you'd like to support this channel, all the options for support are in the description below. Thank you in advance for considering it. The stories in this video came courtesy of subscribers and the Fairy Census, so a big thank you to everyone who submitted. The stories were edited for dramatic and narrative reasons, but if you'd like to read the full unedited census stories, follow the link in the description to the Fairy Investigation Society's website. If you enjoyed this video, please leave a comment, like, share, and subscribe if you're new. It really helps the channel grow. And don't forget to hit the bell to receive notifications of new videos. And until next time, this has been a visit from your scary fairy godmother.